The first thing is that if you are interested in the DevOps space, you should definitely subscribe to the 0800 newsletter.
Dear subscribers of 0800 DevOps, today I'm talking to Alanna Brown, Senior Director Marketing at Puppet. Alanna, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Ivan.
Alanna, you are one of the authors of this year's State of DevOps report, and I'm really looking forward to talking about the main insights that this report reveals. But maybe first, let's introduce you and the Puppet. I'm sure most of our subscribers are already familiar with Puppet, but nevertheless, can you please tell us a bit more about yourself and Puppet?
Yeah, of course. So I've been at Puppet for a very long time now. I started 9 years ago, back when we were a 50-person company, and now we've grown to around 500 employees all around the world. And Puppet was founded by Luke Knies, who started Puppet as an open source project back in 2005 because he was dissatisfied with the current state of configuration management and the tools that were available on the market at that time. And those are a lot of the first generation tools like Blade Logic and CF Engine. And Luke was very much ahead of his time, and he popularized the concepts of declarative, model-driven infrastructure management and concepts like idempotency and things like that. So Puppet is best known for configuration management, but we have spent the past couple of years really expanding our product portfolio into vulnerability management with Puppet Remediate, compliance with our new product Puppet Comply, and also event-driven automation with a product called Puppet Relay. So, I actually started the State of DevOps report back in 2012. I created it. The DevOps at that point was still, it was very much a buzzword, and I don't think any of us really thought it'd be around for very long. And, it's really something that only the cool kids were doing. All of the big web op shops were talking about it, like Flickr's 10 deploys a day, right? That was like mind blowing back then. And then the other thing is that there were no vendors in the space that were really doing primary research. That was really the domain of the big analysts, Gartner, Forrester, et cetera. And when I came into Puppet, I knew I wanted to do a big research project. DevOps was like really heating up at the time, and kind of all the stars aligned. So you know the story, Ivan, from our little Twitter conversation.
Yeah, I was very much both confused and interested in how this whole thing started, because after a number of years, DORA is not mentioned in this report. And if you see, just like Puppet wasn't mentioned in the report the year before. So it made me wonder, is it the same report or are there several reports? how this whole report thing came to life?
So I can give you the background on that. It's kind of funny. So Gene Kim, who I think everyone knows, he is a friend of Luke's, actually. And so when I started the State of DevOps report, I knew that Gene was about to publish the Phoenix Project, which is, his groundbreaking novel about DevOps. And, so I asked him if he might be interested in joining the project. And he jumped on board immediately. He was so excited about it because he had been trying to get metrics around IT performance for a very long time with the IT Institute. And so he was really excited to be able to finally get the data that he wanted. And then he brought on Jez Humble, who everyone knows, he wrote the book on continuous delivery. And we pretty much bootstrapped the whole thing in 2012 as a very small team working on this survey and the report. And there was just so much interest in it. And then in 2014, our analyst at the time went to Lisa, and we had this chance meeting with Nicole Forsgren, who I think also everyone knows. And she was familiar with the survey. She had read the report and she really wanted to help. So we brought her into the project. And of course, Nicole comes from an academic background as an academic researcher. So she completely up-leveled, the entire project, bringing that level of academic rigor to the data collection and analysis. We partnered for several years together. During that time, Nicole and Jez formed Dora, and then they were bought by Google right around 2018. And that's kind of when the partnership ended. And we continued producing our State of DevOps report, and they produced their Accelerate report with Google for 2 years.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story how a lot of people with great ideas came together on a mission to actually explore this new, basically at that point, DevOps thing, and see how the industry could be changed with the application of these methods. So it was actually very great result. And this story about you gathering and giving the best that you could at that point is really excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to think back on that time and just kind of the growth and explosion in growth in DevOps. Gene started the DevOps Enterprise Summit. Dora was formed. They wrote the Accelerate book based on our 4 years of data gathering and analysis together. And so, the DevOps space, I think, continues to grow and expand. And I think there's real value in these practices that are going to have enduring long-term effects, in the technology industry.
Yeah, I think it's clearly visible, the positive effects.
Yeah.
Let's dive into this year's State of DevOps report. I was happy to see that one of the main insights of the report was correlation between DevOps maturity of an organization and the introduction of internal platforms. I have personally explored this topic of platforms and platform teams for months now, and it's super interesting for me personally. So can you please share with us the correlation that you discovered?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will start by saying that I think platform is a very loaded term. And how we defined a platform is it's built by a team internally for its own internal customers, which are typically application developers. And the guiding principles are global optimization and economies of scale. And the only way that you can actually achieve those economies of scale is through standardization. So you have to standardize the technologies, your processes, your team interactions. And then the other thing that's super important in this is self-service, which is a key characteristic of an internal platform. So the whole goal, and there's a lot of value in internal platform teams when it's done right, but they should be enabling application development teams to move at their own pace. And what we found is that the use of internal platforms is actually pretty high. So something like 63% of the respondents said they had at least one or more internal platforms. And then also, it was strongly correlated, like you said, with DevOps evolution. So we found that, as organizations evolve, the more likely they are to have a high usage of internal platform teams.
Yeah. I mean, we see it also both internally and with some of our customers. And one thing that also stick to me is that we see a lot of warnings lately that internal platforms are definitely a good thing, economies of scale and standardization, but we need to be extra careful not to reinvent the wheel or go overboard in building something like a spaceship that nobody will use. So what do you see out there? Are organizations taking this advice seriously or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea, when it's done right, is that the internal platform team should be customer obsessed. They should be focused on meeting their customer needs. And again, their customers are their internal application developers. And so one of the things that we looked at is, one of our core hypotheses actually for the platform is that the more you treat your platform as a product, the more likely your platform is to succeed. And so in order to understand that, we asked a bunch of questions like, are you gathering requirements from your internal stakeholders? Is there someone on the team that's acting as a product manager for the platform? Is there a roadmap? Does the platform team provide support and onboarding help? Are they testing new capabilities with the teams that will be using them? And the more that respondents agreed to these statements, the higher their score was for what we call product mindset. And we found that the organizations whose DevOps evolution had reached a really advanced level, they were twice as likely to have a really highly product-oriented mindset as those that were kind of in the middle.
Yeah, this is really what resonates, that the platform should be treated as a product built by a platform team, and that has its own customers, clients, which are basically other teams. And this maps nicely to team topologies and the work of Manuel Pais and Matthew Skelton about four archetypes in every organization, 4 team archetypes, and basically having a platform team as providing service for other teams, stream-aligned teams, enabling teams, and complicated subsystem teams. Did you see maybe organizations having platform team also utilizing these other archetypes?
You know, one of our co-authors, Michael Stonke, who is the VP of Engineering at Circle CI, they do utilize that model. And there are several companies out there. And if you go to the Team Topologies website, it's just teamtopologies.com. There are several different use cases. Twilio is one really good example, and he has a number of other examples there that use that model. I think it's really smart. Honestly, I've been following Matthew Skelton for a very long time. I love the work that they are doing on team topologies. And the thing that I love the most about it is that it is human-centered and it's team-centric, and it's not about technologies so much as how the team should be interacting with each other and what the contract should be between those different teams. And I think actually that is the thing that's missing in most of the conversation around DevOps.
Yeah, I also love this humanity part, especially a definition that he coined of a platform being a curated experience for developers. So there is no notion of fat technology, advanced platforms, or any features. It just implies, give me the thinnest viable platform, as they call it, and whatever that is, just to make my developer experience smoother and simpler.
Yeah. Exactly. And that orientation around the customer and having a product mindset and having really good software engineering practices around building a product, that is how you scale a platform team and really add value, because there are a lot of different platforms out in the market that you can buy, but what is the value that that platform team is providing to the organization? I think that's really where the secret sauce is. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, it's difficult to find one off the shelf and just buy it and plug it in and everything will work as advertised. So there obviously isn't such a thing
exactly
on the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turns out that the best approach to building a platform is a product-oriented approach. So it seems like all the traditional methods that we use in product development are also applicable here, like talking to the customers, design thinking sessions, even building personas and defining, learning what users you will have on this platform and how they will use the platform. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it makes very much sense. One thing I'm also very curious about, and from my personal experience, did you see any difference in organizations that are product-oriented versus organizations that are service-oriented in terms of platforms and platform team organization?
We didn't ask specifically about that. We did, we asked the question about product mindset and then correlated that with DevOps evolution. But I think that, in a typical service-oriented model, you end up with a lot of silos where everyone is just trying to serve the needs of their own service. But when you're talking about a platform team, they have a pretty broad purview, and they are their goal should be to provide these global optimizations that can be used by 80% of the different use cases out there, right? And so I think if you're talking about scaling DevOps practices and being able to kind of scale CI/CD, infrastructure management, all of that, I think a platform team is a really viable option for that.
Definitely.
And I'm not saying it's the only one. I'm sure you can achieve that with this more service-oriented mindset. And I'm sure that there's crossover between the two, but it's not something that we explicitly studied.
Yeah. One challenge that I see here is since platform-oriented organizations are working with, service-oriented organizations are working with many clients, it becomes difficult at some point to, I wouldn't say enforce, but achieve this standardization, because every client, every product that they are building is a bit different, as opposed to product-oriented organizations, which have this advantage, I would say, in building either one or a limited number of products. So it seems to me like in these situations, this endeavor of building a platform team is much, I would say, easier than in service-oriented organizations. So, yeah, unfortunately. But organizations did admit a number of challenges when building a platform. So it's not that easy to build a platform. Can you share with us what are the most common obstacles that organizations stumble upon when building platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back to the report real quick. I have it up in front of me, and there were a couple of key challenges. Let me find it real quick so I can have an accurate accounting of it. So the top challenges, we actually looked at the challenges based on how evolved they are in their DevOps evolution. So we looked at the low, mid-level, and high level. And what was super interesting was that everyone said lack of time, and all the authors were, we kind of scratched our heads on this one, because lack of time can actually mean a lot of things. And typically what it means is lack of prioritization. But at what some of the interesting tidbits that came out is that at low evolution, lack of empowerment from leadership was a big one, and lack of standardization. And actually, lack of standardization is across the board for all three at low, middle, and high evolution. And one of the things that's so fascinating to me is that in the 2018 State of DevOps report, if you're familiar with that one, we actually look at the 5 stages of DevOps evolution. And the first 2 stages are all around sort of normalizing, rationalizing, and standardizing your environments. And we think down the line, this is one of the most powerful things that you can do to scale your DevOps practice. Because if you have 100 different things that you're managing, you can't gain the same expertise that you would if you standardized. And it's something that we don't talk a lot about in DevOps, because standardization typically is sort of a dirty word for developers. They don't like to be told what they should be using, right? And so, but everyone cites this as a key problem. Lack of technical skills is also an issue, and it's hard to say whether or not that's real or perceived, or if people just don't have the time really to develop the skills that they need. And then at high evolution, what's different from the others is that onboarding dev teams to the platform was cited as one of the top 3 challenges. So, they've kind of overcome a lot of the issues in the earlier stages, and now they are trying to convince more developers to get on board the platform, which I think is a great a problem to have, because that means the platform is useful in delivering value.
Yeah. It means that it survived the scrutiny of all the teams, and all the teams are actually eager to onboard.
Yeah.
And it also really maps nicely to one thing that Matthew Skelton also said when asked, how do you make people use the platform? And he said, make it voluntarily. So you don't want to impose platform on anybody, which also makes you alert on what things the users of the platform actually need, and makes you think about it and talk to people and build a platform in the right way. Because if nobody wants to onboard your platform, then perhaps something is wrong with it. So don't impose it on teams. Make it voluntarily to board on. And it's
I
really,
totally agree with that. Yeah.
it really maps nicely.
I think that is so key because it creates the right incentive structures for the platform team. So if the platform team knows that it has to be a voluntary movement, then they're going to build exactly what you said. They're going to build the right product that meets the needs of their customers. If it's mandated from top down, first of all, no one's going to use it, or they're going to try to evade the process and get around it, and no one's going to enjoy using it. And so I think those are really key points.
Yeah, if this is a shadow IT, then we will get shadow IT.
Exactly.
Yeah, but also this lack of time that is mentioned in all three levels actually signalizes also, for me at least, that this is something that takes time throughout this platform life cycle. So it doesn't get any I don't know easier, let's say, to build it. So it mandates continuous efforts to develop it and to maintain it in the future. So it's not like we have one point where we say, okay, we have built the platform, that this is it, and now we can turn to something else. It actually demands a continuous care.
That's exactly it. And I think it ties into our discussion about having a product mindset. This isn't just a project that you deploy once and then it's done, right? This is a long-term product that you're building, and it has to be funded appropriately. It has to be staffed appropriately. You have to give people the time and space to build it the right way, and think of it as you would a product that's going out to your external customers. So I think that lack of time is really an indication of lack of prioritization, lack of funding. I think there are a lot of things tied up in that. And I think for leadership, what they need to know is they need to treat this as a long-term thing if they want it to be successful.
Yeah, definitely. And also there are other, I guess, risks in treating platform not as a product, but as a series of projects that are done on this product. In the end, it is quite possible to, I guess, build features on top of the platform, but not coordinated, and end up with something that nobody will use in the end. And it's also, I believe, something that people should take care of and not stumble upon this obstacle also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Building a platform. Great. There was another very important insight from the report dealing with change management. So there is also obviously a correlation between change management practice and DevOps evolution in the organizations. How do organizations stack up in this area? What did you discover about correlation of change management and DevOps evolution in a particular organization?
Yeah, so change management was the other big theme. And that's actually where we started with when we were trying to figure out what the theme should be for this year's report. And the reason we chose change management is because in stage 3, if you look at the DevOps evolution model, this is where organizations start to expand their DevOps practices beyond just DevOps. And this is also the point where some of those restrictions and the approval processes start to loosen a little bit, because there's this trust that's been built up across the teams in automation and in the work that the teams are doing, because they've been able to successfully deploy or whatever it is. They've been successful at doing what they're doing through automation. And so What we found, though, is that most organizations are stuck in the middle stages of their evolution. Year over year, for the past 3 years, the majority of the market or the majority of the respondents are in the middle. That hasn't moved at all. It's been really flat. And so we wanted to look at what's blocking people from expanding DevOps practices beyond stage 3 and getting to those higher levels where they are integrating security and also implementing self-service capabilities. So, and we found that anecdotally, at least, change management was a huge blocker. And the reason for that is that in large organizations, it's so deeply embedded into the processes and the practices of these technical organizations that it would require a massive structural change to change all that. And what we see time and time again is that people are trying to implement new DevOps capabilities, and then they hit that change management wall. So that's why we looked into it. I don't know if you've seen that as well with some of the organizations that you've worked with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, something very similar, and it usually is something that pops up in very early stages when we try to draw something like a value stream map, and in these situations, these gates between various stages become very visible at some point. So things like for pushing one liner to the production, it takes a couple of days for people to get together, figure out what the change really is, and push it further down the pipeline. So actually resonated very well with what you were writing in this report, and this is why it got my attention in the beginning.
Well, I'm glad it did, because we are so interested, like we've been obsessively focused on how do you scale DevOps practices beyond stage 3 for the past couple of years. And I think what we found in the report is we looked at approval processes, including how frequently organizations actually try to evade their current change management practices and processes. We also looked at automation practices in terms of testing and deployment, and risk mitigation. So things like blue-green deployments or canary deployments are gaining in popularity, and they're kind of offsetting the need for manual risk mitigation. Like if you have automated testing, automated deployments, automated risk mitigation techniques as you're pushing to production, you are mitigating risk in a really substantial way that kind of subverts the idea of needing all of this change management process. And so the 4 approaches that are outlined in the report based on these practices, the first one is what we called operationally mature. So this group, they have a really high level of orthodox process, but they are also doing a lot of automation. So this group was sort of the weird outlier because they're doing everything. And so that was interesting to us. The second group is engineering driven, and these are smaller companies, and they have a very high focus on automation and especially automated risk mitigation. The third group is governance focused, and these are larger organizations in highly regulated industries. Probably sounds familiar. They have a very high emphasis on manual approvals, very low automation environments. And then the final group is ad hoc, and they don't have a lot of process. They're much smaller size and smaller teams, and they don't have a ton of automation, but they are doing some automation. So they are able to move faster because they've automated some things, but they don't have a lot of process holding them back. So I thought that was really interesting to see where organizations kind of fall into those 4 buckets. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah, it pretty much resonates. I think I love these 2 dimensions that you build. One dimension is change approval process, and the other one is the degree of automation. And this change approval process, differentiating orthodox versus adaptive organizations, where I can pretty much relate to these orthodox organizations, looking at them basically and seeing these these organizations where decisions are made across several levels of hierarchy versus adaptive organizations where decisions are made in the team, where the action is really happening. And it really makes a lot of difference in terms of lead time and how much time does it take for a change to happen in a production. And I honestly don't know in these large organizations how actually, what do you think is a good approach to changing this process and to influencing these processes in the organization to change in a way that would be faster, smoother, and with less gates than it is today?
I think what's super important is to look at what are the DevOps principles that we can apply to our change management practice. And, the principles are really about small batches, right? And the reason that, change management is so fraught with risk is because people don't like the process. And so they tend to batch a bunch of changes together and it becomes this big change, which is inherently more risky than small changes, right? So we need to think in small batches, which is a core kind of, DevOps principle. And of course, the collaboration, because I don't think that technical teams have a very strong understanding of what their service management teams do and the value that they provide, and vice versa. So the service management teams think that their DevOps teams are all cowboys, right? And they're just doing all this stuff without any sort of governance at play. And so like one of our customers, he works for a very large bank, and he took the approach of just sitting down with his auditors and with his change management teams and talking through the changes and talking about what will be automated, what needs to go through the approval process, and then working directly with those teams to ensure that they were showing that those changes were successfully being successfully deployed and mitigating risk that way. And that's really that's what we see with security as well. So in our last report, we focused on how security is integrated into the software delivery lifecycle. And we looked at the top practices that really instill a sense of confidence in your security posture with your teams. The top practice was threat modeling. And threat modeling is a practice that happens in the design and requirements gathering stage. So in those very early stages, these teams are collaborating to really understand what the risks are, how they're going to deal with those risks if something should happen. And so I think that's that principle for DevOps is so important, collaborating early and often. And it's one that's worked. And it sounds so unsophisticated in some ways, but it really does work.
You won't tell me that this is the solution for all the problems, just to collaborate better. It sounds too simple. It must be something more difficult and more expensive to implement.
Yeah, I know, really. But no, it's really about people, team interactions, how they work together. And I think that is at the core of what DevOps is about, is people working better together, so towards a common goal.
Yeah. I by the way, love the story about that person that made its auditor best friend. So, okay, let's come together, let's talk, and let's see what actually do you need, and I will tell you how I can automate this in my deployment pipelines, and which automated checks can I put in. And I believe this is a great example of how to proceed in changing these processes and influencing them.
And the other thing, that I didn't mention is measurement, of course. You need to be able to speak the language of the teams that you're working with. If you are the person who is saying, we need to make this change, then the burden of proof is on you to prove that that change will be successful, right? And so I think measurement is really key. Understanding where you are and what the desired end state is so important. And being able to show that value in the language of the team that you're imposing that change upon is also important. And all of that really ultimately comes down to breaking down silos and building empathy with people around the organization.
Yeah, truly understanding what this auditor really needs and why he.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing that also stuck with me in the report was the concept of making changes in code versus in prose. It's something that a lot of organizations still don't do, and it's super important both for traceability and for automated deployments and if needed rollbacks also. So it comes down to the configuration as code principles, infrastructure as code principles. Did you see organizations, what is the trend? Do organizations use it more and more, or how is the state of this practice in the industry?
No, it's so funny because we've been talking about infrastructure as code for a decade at Puppet. And it's interesting to see the resurgence of that term over the past 2 years. And suddenly there's a ton of interest in it again. And I think, we sort of took it for granted because we've been talking about it for so long and just kind of assumed that that's what people are doing. But you're absolutely right, Ivan. People are not doing this. In our data, in our results, what we found is that the engineering-driven organizations, they have the highest use of writing their changes as code versus all the other groups. And I think that tells you a lot because there's, as you know, when infrastructure is written as code, that provides traceability, auditability. You can treat it, those changes like, you can apply software engineering best practices against it, do version control, peer review, automated testing, automated deployment, all of that good stuff
all those
happens.
Great practices, yeah, all those.
Yeah, exactly. And so we really do see it as a foundational practice for DevOps. And it's something that we talk about in our 2018 report, where all artifacts, and actually reports prior to that as well, but really all artifacts should be in version control, infrastructure should be written as code, et cetera. Those are just key practices. There's no world in which you won't have to do that in the future if you want to be relevant in this space.
And for the organizations which are stuck in and want to make their first steps toward automation, what would you suggest? How should they start? What are the good first steps?
I always say the same thing, and we come from it from an infrastructure lens, obviously, but start small and find something that's low risk but high value. So I can give an example of this. We have a very large retail customer, and they started by managing NTP on a couple of boxes. That's it. And now they've grown to managing over, nearly 100,000 nodes and millions of resources across those nodes worldwide, in their distributed stores and warehouses and distribution centers, et cetera. And so you can, you have to pick something that's going to add value and that's going to free up your time so that you can automate something else. And that's kind of how it starts to snowball. So once you get enough of this automation content in place, then you can kind of start stringing it all together, and it becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, but it takes one initial moment to decide, okay, I will never do anything manually again. If it takes 2 times as much time, I will do it automated way, and I will build my automation one step at a time until I have everything automated. I don't think there are that you can skip it in a way and get it as a given. It's something that needs to be invested, and you need to be extra conscious why you're doing it in the end.
Yeah, and there's no silver bullet. You just have to do the work, and you have to do it one step at a time. And you start small, improve value along the way. And that's what we always recommend.
Yeah. And usually some unexpected things happen and you miss this configuration as a code, infrastructure as a code, change as a code when you need it most. It's very interesting. We had an earthquake here in Zagreb 6 months ago, and a lot of organizations and their data centers died. And it was quite an effort to put them back on. And at those points in time, you actually start to appreciate having this automation in place and all this mechanism in place. But you don't want to have this kind of force majeure to make you change your ways and start using automation as soon as possible.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's usually the case, though. We have another customer who, started deploying Puppet after Hurricane Sandy took down their data center, and they're like, we're never hand building these servers again. But it shouldn't take that, right? Like you should, as an organization, decide that automation is a priority and then make the time for it. And a lot of practitioners just don't have the time for it.
Yeah, that's it. Make automation a priority.
Mm-hmm.
All these insights are super interesting, Alanna, and people, please take a look at the report. Many useful things inside. For the end, Alanna, can you share with us what are you reading these days and who are some people that you follow that make you think differently and do better?
I love this question so much. I'm glad you asked. So the first thing is that if you are interested in the DevOps space, you should definitely subscribe to the 0800 newsletter. And there's a couple of other newsletters that are really great. DevOps Weekly by my friend Gareth Rushgrove. He curates a fantastic newsletter. He's been doing it for 10 years.
Yeah, what is it? 514th issue was last week.
I know, it's amazing. And he's just a wonderful person. So I recommend following him. And then there's another one that I really like called Software Lead Weekly by Oren Ellenbogen. And he curates really some of the best content out there that's geared towards engineering managers primarily. But there's a lot in there that I love to read about because so much of it is kind of human focused. The other one is, in my research, I discovered Will Larson, who's the author of An Elegant Puzzle. His website is lethane.com. And he also has a really great newsletter that's geared towards engineering management called Irrational Exuberance. And then another person whose work I follow is Gallo Navarro. He is a lead software engineer at New Relic, and New Relic was actually a sponsor of the report, but he speaks and writes about building platform teams. And I think his writing is so clear and fantastic. And then finally, we already talked about team topologies, but I cannot recommend Matthew Skelton and Manuel Paes enough. I love how human-centered they are and how they focus on what the team interaction should look like, because I really do think that that is the missing piece of this whole DevOps puzzle. So I really recommend just checking out their website and buying their book that was recently published.
You gave me so many good suggestions now that I have my homework for this Christmas, definitely.
Well, there's so much great content out there. So
yeah, it is great. Alanna, thank you very much for your time. It was an extremely pleasant conversation and very, very informative for me. And again, people, State of DevOps report 2020, great stuff, a lot of great ideas inside. Take a look, definitely. Alanna, thank you for your time once again and hope to see you next time in real life.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, Ivan.